Greetings and welcome to Cybersecurity Today. I'm your host, Jim Wiggins. If this is your first time tuning into our program, allow me a few moments to introduce what we're all about. So what exactly is Cybersecurity Today? Well, it's a show designed to explore the realm of computer security in an exciting and thoughtful way. Cybersecurity Today is a half-hour news broadcast utilizing a talk show format to break down the themes, topics, and current events in the cybersecurity industry. Our mission with this program is to dispel the murkiness and complexity often associated with the cybersecurity sector. For our viewers who are already active professionals in the field, this show will delve and deliver a pulse on the current state of affairs. We feature a variety of esteemed guests to delve into topics that are important to those in the cybersecurity space. Our objective is to offer information to a diverse audience, from beginners to experts and everyone in between. You're sure to gain fresh insights from today's show. All right, let's set the stage and discuss the structure of the show. This will help you understand what's in store. Today's show is divided into two parts. Our first segment, known as Cyber Bites, covers several current events unfolding today in the cybersecurity sector. Some of these stories might be familiar, while others may be entirely new to you. Then, in our second segment, we're joined by Mr. Greg Witte, president of Paladin LLC, to discuss what's new in the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. He'll share insights on the key updates, how organizations can align with the new framework components, and practical strategies to operationalize it effectively to strengthen cybersecurity posture. Okay, let's get into the Cyber Bites and talk about what's going on today in the cybersecurity industry. In current news, hackers exploited a previously contracted email delivery vendor system to send fraudulent messages impersonating Indiana state agencies. The scam messages alerted recipients to unpaid tolls and unusual PayPal activity, aiming to deceive them into providing personal information. The Indiana Office of Technology confirmed the breach and emphasized that the state does not send toll notifications via text or email. This incident underscores the importance of securing third-party vendor systems even after contracts have ended. In other news, a report indicates that details of 89 million Steam accounts may have been compromised and are allegedly being sold on the dark web. The breach potentially exposes users to phishing attacks and unauthorized access to their gaming accounts. Users without two-factor authentication or weak passwords are particularly at risk. Steam users are advised to update their passwords and enable additional security measures immediately. In other news, Commvault confirmed that hackers exploited a critical vulnerability, CVE 2025-3928, in its web server software. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, has added this flaw to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, mandating federal agencies to apply patches by May 19, 2025. The vulnerability allowed unauthorized access to sensitive data, highlighting the need for timely software updates. Organizations using Commvault are urged to implement the necessary security patches promptly. Those are some of the top headlines shaping the cybersecurity landscape. We're taking a quick break, but when we return, Mr. Greg Witte, president of Paladin LLC, will join us to discuss the latest updates to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0.
Hi, I'm Josh Temple. You might have seen me on TV where I help folks turn their houses into dream homes. But forget construction. Parenting is the toughest job there is. So when you need help or advice, turn to the parenting experts at Boys Town.
Welcome back to Cybersecurity Today. Next, we're honored to host Mr. Greg Witte, president of Paladin LLC, and a widely recognized authority in governance, risk management, and cybersecurity standards. With over 4 decades of experience advising U.S. federal and state agencies, international governments, and leading professional organizations like ISACA and ITAM, Greg has helped shape major cybersecurity frameworks. Notably, he served as a core contributor to the original NIST Cybersecurity Framework and continues to support its evolution, including the recent 2.0 update. His expertise spans AI security, compliance risk, and standards such as NIST, ISO, COBIT, and digital trust. Today, he joins us to discuss what's new in the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 and how organizations can adopt it to better manage enterprise risk and strengthen their cybersecurity posture. Greg, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's great to be here with you.
Absolutely. We're super excited to have you. Our audience spans the gamut. We have people that know very little about cybersecurity. We've got a lot of experts. So I thought maybe what we could do is ask if we could start with just kind of defining what the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is and what created, maybe prompted the creation of the new version, which is the 2.0.
Sure. Well, it's a great place to start. It's interesting. If you think back to around 2012, 2013, we were really getting pounded with some advanced types of cyber attacks. They're finding new and advanced ways to break into systems. And folks were thinking like, wow, we must really need a new security approach. We need new standards. Unfortunately, some calmer heads prevailed and said, we don't really necessarily need new standards. We've already got hundreds of standards. What we really need is a new approach to try to understand how to use those standards in a better way, how to understand what's working and what wasn't working in the industry. So NIST began working with that industry and did a broad call to say, how can we do things better? And in the State of the Union address in 2013, the president said, 1 year from today, we will announce and provide a framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. That was the original name of the framework. And it was intended to be a way that we could use the existing processes we had, but to have better discussions about what are we doing, how are we doing it, and what could we be doing better. So that became what we have always come to call the Cybersecurity Framework. At that point it was 1.0, but we were able to gather industry from all over the world and say, what are you doing, how's it going, what could we be doing better? And it really kicked off with a workshop up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We gathered up at Carnegie Mellon and we broke up into classrooms of about 50 people each, and we said, so what are you doing? What's working? Why are we having all these new challenges? And we were able to have some really great discussions from industry participants. And through that time, we were able to really build out an approach that continues to work and evolve today.
So I know they just came out with a version 2.0. How does that differ? So if someone's currently using 1.0 or 1.1 of the CSF, what does the 2.0 offer?
Well, the best part is the 1.0 and 1.1 are still absolutely valid. But when we built 2.0, we recognized that it was about time for an update. The Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF, it's based on a set of functions. The goal was to be able to have a quick and simple conversation. So the first thing we did was develop 5 functions. We called them identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And I can have a discussion with just about anybody about those. In fact, my license plate even has those initials, just so I can prompt conversations about it. But if I can identify what matters to my organization and what we're at risk from, then we can do what we need to do to protect against at least the known knowns. And then we can detect things that we need to detect quickly and effectively, and then respond and recover to those. And that's really where the 1.x framework did so well, was that it was just a simple conversation around those 5 functions. Now, of course, that's not enough to build a program around, so we added some categories like asset management, incident handling, incident response planning. We added some categories, but it really is a way to have a simple conversation about how we're applying controls and how to measure and monitor and report what we're doing. But one of the things that we learned from our discussion, we'll talk, I think, a little bit more about the governance side of things. One of the things we learned from our work with ISACA and especially with the financial community, was that there's a need to separate the governance part of what we do in information security from the management. If you think about the captain of a ship, there's got to be a captain who's setting the strategy, setting direction, looking out for what risks they're willing to take and what they aren't going to take. Don't go too close to that reef. Take us ahead 15 knots. Take us over to that shore. There's someone who's calling the shots and deciding where we go, how fast we go, and is achieving the mission. And we realized that in 1.0 and 1.1, we really had mushed those together. So the financial community in particular asked us, hey, could we separate that governance from the management? So we said, yeah, that makes absolute sense. So in CSF 2.0, we were able to create one more function called govern, which is the place where you can describe the strategy, talk about roles and responsibilities and policies and oversight and improvement, and that gave us a place where we could say, here's where we talk about roles and responsibilities and strategy, and all the rest of it is where the captain of a starship would say, make it so. That's where we actually execute those things, and we still have those same 5 functions that support that govern piece.
So you kind of already answered my next question, which is I wanted you to kind of expand upon the govern function that's there now. But so why is it so important? I know that having looked at it, one of the areas of focus tends to be all about alignment, figuring out how does this stuff align to the organization. Can you spend a couple minutes and talk about why that's so important, just from a cyber perspective, and maybe kind of tie it back into the CSF?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things we found as I've gotten the opportunity to work with organizations that were applying the framework, there really was a gap between management and leadership side of things, the board of directors and C-suite, and those who are actually implementing security. And that, for years that was okay, it was getting along, but we've learned over and over again it was really important for those 2 sections to be in alignment. Too many times we've seen that the business people were saying, hey, don't bother me with the security stuff. You guys are security, go do security, without really lending understanding of what their priorities are, what's their direction, what's their budget, what is their appetite for risk, what is it that they expect from these systems that are so vital to bringing value to their organizations. And of course, those of us that have been in the security world were presuming that we could read the minds of those executives and directors and managers to say, I know what they need, I know how long this should be up, I know what controls I need to put in place. Sadly, there was just such a chasm that we weren't able to do the right things the right way. So when we started to better understand how to align an understanding of that risk appetite, the direction, the strategy, the oversight, with what we're actually applying, then all of a sudden now I can choose the right controls, not just because there's controls in a list, but because these will help to fulfill stakeholders' expectations. We worked with a retail firm out on the West Coast, and they had worked really hard to build a great continuity plan. And they spent lots of money and lots of work to build a plan. They had an outage where construction equipment cut through a major fiber and took out about 100 stores. Well, the CISO was pleased because he was able to implement his plan and he got it working and it was great. He was able to fully implement that system within 8 hours and all those stores were back and they had a party for it. And then later I talked to their CEO, he's ready to fire the lot of them because he said they shouldn't have had an outage in the first place, much less taken 8 hours to restore it. And we were able to have a conversation between the two to say, had you ever discussed what was okay and what wasn't okay? You never described your stakeholder expectations. You never talked about what was okay. If he'd come to you and asked you for another $10 million for fault tolerance, you'd say, no way. But yet, you expect him to read his mind. So it's an example of how we really were able to help them think about how do we bring leadership and operations together to agree on an approach, adjust it as you need to, but really think about what is it we're trying to do to implement a better, trustworthy system.
Understood, understood. I know one of the areas of focus that's taken shape pretty significantly in the last 10 years is supply chain risk management.
Yeah.
I think in the 1.0, there really wasn't a heavy focus on it. I know in 2.0, there's been some work done to kind of incorporate it. Can you talk a little bit about what supply chain risk management is and how the NIST CSF 2.0 tries to help strengthen some of that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the supply chain side of things, we've kind of learned the hard way on the federal side that suppliers are some of our best friends, also some of our highest risks. If you look now at all of our information and operational technology, we rely very heavily on outside suppliers. We have, the cloud is pervasive. We depend on something as a service for almost everything. And more organizations were finding that they had they had their security controls pretty well managed internally. But when you looked at all of these different suppliers that were providing services to them, they didn't necessarily have that same level of comfort. So one of the things that was really fortunate for us in that new govern function within CSF 2.0, John Boyens and the team at NIST, the supply chain risk management team, They went back and they looked at all of the things that they'd learned through their extensive work in managing supply chain risk, as far as the organizations that come in and work within your operational team, the outsourcers, they're sending things out to software as a service, platform as a service. All of the things that they learned from working with them, they were able to help create a supply chain category within Cybersecurity Framework. And we were able to add some additional elements of security so that can help drive what people need to do to really think about who are my suppliers, how do I categorize those suppliers in terms of value to the organization, the risk that they might present if something were to go wrong, how to make sure. One of the things we found was that organizations weren't even bringing some of those suppliers in on their planning. So, what do we need to do to bring them into the plan? How do we help them support us in the case that we have a response that need to conduct? So having that supply chain risk management approach and integrating it into the CSF really made it a holistic way to deal with understanding what should we be doing and how should we be doing it from a cybersecurity perspective.
That makes a lot of sense. I was also wondering about emerging technologies, right? It seems like, standards themselves get constructed, and then sometimes new technology kind of outpaces those standards. Artificial intelligence, maybe it's nanotechnology, maybe it's cloud, whatever. How does the CSF 2.0 try to get ahead of that and not be outpaced by the onslaught that we constantly see, quantum, whatever?
Sure. It was interesting. We released the CSF 1.0 in 2014. We did an update to 1.1 in 2018. In 2023, as we were looking at, okay, what do we need to change? What needs to adapt? In many ways, we're trying to see how can we kind of keep this technology agnostic. We're thinking, okay, we've got AI, we've got cloud, we've got quantum, and in many ways, of course, there's some of the most important things are happening on those fronts. And yet, many of the things that we need to do from a cyber perspective, as far as managing our resources and assets, making sure that we are applying the right access controls, making sure we understand what our incident plans would be, how we detect and do continuous monitoring. In many ways, they're the same, but you need to look at them through that new lens. So one of the things that we suggested in CSF 2.0 was to, in fact, we built in some examples into the new version of it to say, you can use your same old processes. You don't have to go back and completely change your policies. And yet you've got to make sure that you're thinking about emergent technologies and emergent risks that come along with those technologies. So AI is just, in many ways, just another type of software, just another type of asset management solution. And yet it changes the whole paradigm. So we need to find a way to kind of look through the same lens, but have that new perspective on it. And we've recommended that organizations should continually be staying aware of what is it coming over the horizon. Too many times organizations get surprised by new technology. So we can think, what could we be looking at tomorrow? Things like quantum, thinking like the whole new virtualization, even thinking about asset management in a new virtual world. It's just that it's always changing. That's one of the things I love about the work that you and I've been doing for so many years together, is that it stays the same. It's a stable platform to build on, and yet it's always changing.
That's right.
We're always getting the opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
And that's exciting. But AI is pervasive in the examples that we provided in 2.0 to say, for example, make sure that you are making sure that access control and that your learning models and that the ways you use AI may be new, but the things you need to secure it for and from, may not be so different.
Yeah, it's just another risk management challenge for us, right? At the end of the day, it sounds like is what you're saying. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Hey, let's talk a little bit about how CSF 2.0 integrates with other standards. A lot of times organizations are looking at something like this and going, that's great, but we're using ISO, or we're using COBIT, or we're using COSO, or does it play with those other standards?
Absolutely. One of the things that I hear frequently is, well, should I use CSF or one of these other standards like you described? An important takeaway for the CSF is to remember it's got to be paired. Remember that when the CSF was born, it wasn't intended to replace a standard. It was intended to help us use those standards better. So it has to work with those well. And one of the nice things that has been built into that model for the CSF is that as we go through, usually what we do is we start with a working group and bring a team together and say, what are you doing? You know, how are you handling asset management? What are you doing about your vendor categorization? Do you have a plan for how you would do business continuity? We go through and start asking questions, and as they do, usually those answers will refer back to particular standards. Well, I'm using CIS for this, I'm using ISO for that. We've got the risk management framework and set of controls from NIST Special Publication 837 and 53. You know, CSF helps drive the way that you would use those different standards. And it gives us a way to document exactly what we want to do. The nice thing about that is, you know, in many cases in the past, long ago, people would just download the standard and say, okay, let's just start throwing some standard at it and just checking boxes and really, you know, at best hoping for compliance and maybe even just checking some boxes. But with a process like the CSF, it helps us have discussions about, well, what is it we're trying to accomplish? And not just how do we throw standards at it, but what are the risks we're trying to address through the use of those controls and methodologies and processes. And when we do that, then we can document not just things, you know, boxes we can check, things we can do. We can actually say, these are the things we're going to do to accomplish these requirements, those stakeholder expectations, those things that the customers expect. So CSF gives us a way to describe and prescribe how we'll use those different standards. So it works out really well. In fact, I had one of my customers who wanted to use CSF as preparation for an ISO assessment they were going to have. They were going to be applying security controls, but they didn't want to do it just for the sake of checking some boxes. They wanted to really be able to say, this is what we implemented and why, based on those discussions. So CSF helped them to kind of translate that and give them a roadmap that they could use for applying the standards.
Understood, understood. You know, I know a lot of organizations will use like maturity models as a way to try to gauge where they're at in terms of their own evolution of cybersecurity.
Yep.
Can you speak for a moment about how CSF like leverages or integrates with maturity models? Is there any kind of tie-in that the CSF facilitates that helps an organization kind of determine where they're at?
I can, and actually that's been a little bit of an interesting journey. We found one of the things that NIST found, kind of surprisingly, they are the measurement center for the entire nation, and yet they've observed how difficult it is to really measure cybersecurity. But one of the things that I think we found in many ways was cybersecurity is not something that can be binary. You can't say, okay, well we've managed our vulnerabilities, so we can check that box off. But you know, there's a need to evolve, and you know, many of the maturity models have taught us that you don't necessarily want to try to be more mature. For example, CMMI has 5 levels. And in many cases, CMMI level 3 is great. It means that the organization has built repeatable processes. You can do the same things over. If I go to different parts of the organization, everybody knows their part to play. And yet, you know, CMMI level 5, you know, that's great if you're trying to put you know, spaceship up into the outer atmosphere, but you may not need level 5. You might need level 5. You know, we don't really know. So I think it's really important to think about maturity from a standpoint of where do we need to be, but also to really drive for that repeatability. Not just, hey, we got it right once, hopefully we can do it again, but how do we build processes and procedures and documentation and training to help us get it right consistently to whatever level we need. But I think that maturity, you know, we've seen cybersecurity maturity is a big focus of the Pentagon these days.
Yeah.
And that's really, the reason for that was that they learned that, you know, it isn't enough just to check a box. It isn't enough just to apply a control. We need to have processes where we can show that it's repeatable and dependable. And that's really comes out in the measurements that we do, and that maturity model provides a way to measure consistently exactly how's it going, exactly how are we doing at that.
Understood. Next to last question for you. Great interview, by the way. Thanks for coming in. Wanted to ask, what steps, let's say an organization wanted to like start to look at the CSF as a potential solution. What are some of the first steps organizations you might suggest they take in order to begin that journey?
I think one of the most exciting parts for me in working with CSF has been the teams that come together. We worked with one organization where they had decided to integrate 23 different departments into a new division they were creating. And there were people that had worked in the same building together for years, and yet they had never collaborated. So the most exciting part for them, and for me working with them, was to just see a team come together. So I think the first part is just get the folks together and say, look, what is it that's important to our organization from a cyber perspective? Kind of going back to the basics. What is it that we're required to do? What is it that we're expected to do? What do our customers and leaders and employees expect? Start documenting those from a requirement standpoint, and then we can say, okay, now that we have that ammunition, now we can build a team that can work through the cybersecurity framework core functions and categories and subcategories. Typically what we say is we created a construct there called a profile, which is nothing more than just writing down what we're doing as an organization, where are we and where do we want to be. And then you can use that understanding of the difference between those two to look at risk and say, well, we really don't have a good solid asset inventory. That means that we could have systems out there, we could have rogue IT or shadow IT that could represent a risk. Well, what should we do about it? Well, I think we should do this. Okay, well, let's put that in our target state. And then you can go through and as an organization, just as a team, start writing down where are we, where do we want to be, how we're going to get there. And it helps you build a roadmap and kind of takes you out of that mindset where we're thinking about ports and protocols and details. And there's more than 1,000 controls in the NIST risk management framework, and they're all valuable for someone who needs them. But the way you get there is by having a discussion as an organization to say, where should we be? Not just because we can get there, not just because some vendor told us to. What do we really need to do to address the risks that we know we have? And based on that, now we can choose as an enterprise what we want to do. And based on that, now we can go back and when we implement a system, we can choose the right controls and monitor and select and make sure that everything stays that way. But starting as a team and having a discussion about what is it we need to do, guided by those functions and categories in the CSF.
Awesome, awesome. Last question for you, Greg. How can viewers connect with you if they have follow-on questions or want to engage with you?
Well, you're certainly welcome to come visit my website. We do a lot of training and a lot of implementation, but mostly stay in touch with NIST, stay aware of the NIST work that's happening. They're getting ready to have a govern workshop that's focused on that new govern function and describe what's happening there. If you just go to nist.gov and particularly Cyber Framework under the nist.gov website, it'll tell you all the events that are happening and everything that's happening with the evolution for supply chain, for emerging technologies. It's always exciting, and that's one of the things that's so much fun for what we do. So stay in touch with NIST and come along for the ride.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Jim. It's been great to be with you.
We really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you so much.
So that wraps up today's episode. We extend our sincere thanks to Mr. Greg Witte for sharing his valuable insights on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. Talked a little bit about enterprise risk management and some of the practical steps organizations can take to think about starting to use the framework. His perspective on translating policy and actionable practices has been really, really helpful and really informative. For more information about our show, Cybersecurity Today, and catch future episodes, please be sure to visit our website at www.cybersecuritytoday.org. Additionally, you can scan the QR code displayed at the bottom of your screen for quick and easy access to our show's website. Finally, we welcome your questions or comments via email at contact@cybersecuritytoday.org. Feel free to reach out to us. We're here to assist and engage with you. That does it for today. Thanks a lot for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next broadcast. Stay safe, stay informed. Have a great day.